Welcome back. The United Nations warning of a staggering human rights crisis unfolding inside scam centers across parts of Asia and beyond. A new report details sprawling operations of vulnerable groups trafficked into forced labor and subjected to abuses. The UN found nearly 3/4 of the scam operations are in the Mekong region, spanning Myanmar, Cambodia, and Vietnam, and affecting some 300,000 people from more than 65 countries. Victims who have been lured by fake job offers find themselves imprisoned in heavily guarded compounds surrounded by barbed wire. Survivors describe a regime of fear. Those unable to meet scam targets describe being beaten, starved, or locked for hours in so-called water cells. Many recount being forced to work up to 19 hours daily for months without a break. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk says the scale of abuse points to modern-day slavery operating in plain sight. He is urging governments to dismantle these criminal networks, tackle corruption that allows them to thrive, and to ensure those rescued are treated as victims, not criminals. And that starts with recognizing forced criminality within anti-trafficking laws. The UN notes scam syndicates often collude with government officials, making dismantling such operations all the more difficult. The rise of generative AI is also playing a role in identifying targets. Recruiters are employing AI models over social media to search for victims displaying signs of financial difficulties. Estimates value the global scam industry at roughly $64 billion. But the UN stresses that its real cost is measured in human suffering. UN Human Rights Advisor Pia Oberoi explained to CNA why 70% of survivors say they would still consider migrating again after returning home, despite falling victim to scam operations.
What we found was that there's very powerful behavioral enablers that are leading people into them, not as a matter, as one of the survivors that we quote in the report, not as a matter of them being greedy or stupid, but really because there's no meaningful way in the way that recruitment and being organized around labor migration. There's very little ability for people to make the distinction through very sophisticated operations. The recruitment operations that are carried out by the scam centers are very, very sophisticated, multi-level. So we do want to call for safe labor migration pathways too.
Ms. Oberoi also elaborated on one of the report's recommendations, ensuring victims are not portrayed as criminals to ensure they are not subject to being re-victimized.
The non-punishment principle for victims of trafficking that is indeed, integrated into ASEAN legal instruments as well as guidelines on the non-punishment principle, make it very clear that people that have been trafficked should not be subject to further penalty, even for crimes that they may have been forced to commit, or for immigration violations in the course of their trafficking experience. So again, I think what we're really calling for is for an individual-based screening and identification to understand the situation of these many, many thousands of people that are being released or are managing to release themselves from these operations, so that they are not subject to re-victimization, and indeed then they're not kind of vulnerable to being re-trafficked. And this is one of our concerns at the moment, when we're seeing large numbers of people that are just being released from centers, that they are in a very vulnerable position to re-trafficking.
With scam operations in Southeast Asia expanding rapidly, Ms. Oberoi underscores the region's vulnerability and outlines what the UN agency recommends governments do to tackle the roots of this, to allow authorities to reach into the roots of the fast-growing criminal industry.
In a region that is suffering from high levels of debt distress, where many of the survivors told us that the reasons that they went into these operations, was because of high levels of poverty and inability to, gain livelihoods. The kinds of profits from these scam operations is distorting, in a sense, the ability of governments to really reach deep into the roots of the operations. to be able to eradicate these business models, which are in a way that is meaningfully disruptive. And so one of the recommendations that we have out of the report is that a vibrant civic space, so that where you have the ability of independent investigative journalists to carry out their kind of legitimate work to raise public awareness, to blow the whistle, where you have civil society organizations that are able to understand and speak on behalf of victims, where you have those guardrails, the checks and balances, that we would like to see in rules-based societies. Then we can probably work towards meaningful disruption, as opposed to more performative raids or law enforcement operations.